All right, tonight I'm going to show you how to solve the problems on your homework. This is the MSG page 5, and it is getting us ready for our Unit 1 test on Friday. So problem number 1 is just, all these problems ask you to complete the following problems, and you must show all your work to receive credit. So I'm actually going to show you all the steps that are required to get full credit for this assignment. So we're going to start with problem number 1, which is dividing fractions. Okay, and we are going to keep the first fraction. We're going to change that division into multiplication, and we're going to change 1/5 into its reciprocal, which is 5 over 1. And we use the acronym KEEP, change, flip to remind us. So keep the first fraction, change from division to multiplication, and flip or change that other fraction into its reciprocal. And then you simply multiply across if you can. But before we do, we talked about in class today how we're going to look to see if we can simplify before we multiply. Do you see any factors top to bottom that could be simplified because they share a common factor? Well, I do. I see 5 and 5. 5 and 5 have a common factor of 5. So when I divide by 5 on top, I get 1. When I divide by 5 on the bottom, I get 1. Do you see any more factors top to bottom? Can't do this with side by side. They have to be something from the tops matches with something on the bottom. I do not, so that means I'm going to multiply. 3 times 1 is 3. 1 times 1 is 1. And the final answer is actually going to be 1, because 3 over 1 means 3 divided by 1, and that is just 3. Notice that I'm boxing in my answer to make it easier to see, and I've shown all the work required to solve the problem. Question number 2 is asking us to add decimals. Now, I taught you guys in class that I recommend when you're adding decimals or subtracting decimals, you set yourself up a little template so that you know where to put everything, and then you build your numbers around those decimals. So this is 13 and 12/100ths. This is 6. Remember, there's a little invisible decimal behind any number, any whole number. 7 and 1/10. Anywhere that you've got other place values, you can put in zeros after the decimal to just make sure everything lines up properly. This way, when you make this little template, you know that all your numbers are lined up correctly. So then we're just going to add. 2 plus 0 plus 0 is 2. 1 plus 0 plus 1 is 2. 3 plus 6 is 9. Plus 7 is 16. And 1 plus 1 is 2. And notice at the end, I'm just going to box in my answer so it's easy to spot. Remember, I always say this in class, that when you guys do 1, I grade 130. So make sure that you can make your work easy for me to see so that I can give you as much credit as possible. Now, number 3 asks us to multiply 1 and 25/100ths times 2 and 3/10ths. Notice that I didn't line up my decimals, and actually I'm not even going to worry about those decimals until I've done my multiplication. Now I do my standard multiplication algorithm. 3 times 5 is 15, carry the 1. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. 3 times 1 is 3. Then when I go down to do the next row of multiplication, I'm actually not multiplying by 2 so much as multiplying by 20, because it's the 20. So we have to add a 0 placeholder to account for that. Then we multiply as usual. So 2 times 5 is 10. 2 times 2 is 4. Plus 1 is 5, and 2 times 1 is 2. Then we add. Now, here's where the decimal comes into play. We count all the places that are after decimals in our problem. So I count 3 of them there. We start the decimal at the back end of our number, and we count the same number of places out. 1, 2, 3. So my final answer is 2 and 875 thousandths. Okay. Question number 4 is 5/10ths divided by 10. So before I can divide, I want to make sure that that's a fraction so that we can take a reciprocal. We keep, we change, we flip. Do you see any factors top to bottom that have a common factor? Yep, 5 and 10, and you can use either of the 10s, it doesn't matter. 5 and 10 share a factor of 5. That makes this 1 and this 2 when we divide. And now I don't have anything else top to bottom to match, so I multiply across, and there is my answer. Question number 5 is a subtraction problem. So again, I'm going to line up those decimals. I'm going to make myself my little structure. And as I told you guys in class, remember that the decimal travels to where the answer is. So in addition and subtraction, the decimal is going to fall right down because that's where the answer goes. In division, it would be bumped up because it goes up where the answer goes. All right, so when we look at this problem, we're going to put the 72. Remember, we have that imaginary decimal sitting out here. And then 1 68/100ths, and fill in your zeros. And now I can subtract. Now I cannot take 8 things away if I do not have anything to take. So I have nothing to borrow from over here or to regroup from. So I got to go all the way over to this 2. This 2 becomes a 1, making this a 10. Now I have 10. I'm going to make this a 9 and this a 10. When I subtract 2, 3, 0, 7. And that is my final answer. And the final problem for tonight's homework is the division problem right here. And before we can divide fractions, we need to change them into improper fractions. So 5 times 2 is 10, plus 1 is 11 halves. Because remember, 5 wholes, when it takes 2 to make a whole, if I've got 5 of them, 2 at a time, that makes 10, plus 1 extra. That's where this comes from. And then we're still dividing because I haven't done any changing yet. I'm just changing them into improper fractions. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5 over 2. Now I'm going to change, and I'm going to flip over to the reciprocal. Do you see any common factors top to bottom? The 2's, when you divide out, you get 1 and 1. I don't see any other ones. 11/5 is my final answer, and that is a perfectly acceptable answer for me. However, you can change it into a mixed number because 5 goes into 11 2 times with 1 piece left over when I needed 5 to make another whole group. Either of those are acceptable answers. Hope you checked your work and you've done well.